Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Schaffer. I'm the editor of Washingtonian, and I'm here today with Dr. Wayne Frederick. He is the president of Howard University. Dr. Frederick became president of Howard in 2014 in the midst of what was a terrible financial crisis for the school. And I remember reading about this, and at the time, I thought, well, this is a little bit of a strange appointment. He's an alumnus, but he's a world-class physician. And that's a different core competence from being an institutional financial turnaround specialist. And now here we are 6 years later, and Howard and pretty much every other university and family in America is in a very different kind of crisis, which puts him in a rather different, unique position because he's the only medical doctor leading any DC area school, just as colleges respond to this pandemic. Dr. Frederick, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Frederick came to Howard when he was 16 years old. He grew up in Trinidad and had enrolled in Howard's joint BA MD program. This meant that by the time he was 22, he was a full-fledged doctor. He was, if you do the math, he was too young to rent a car, but he was actually allowed to slice people open and operate on them, which he has done very successfully. He's actually a triple alumnus because somewhere between earning a medical degree and doing stints at the MD Anderson Center in Houston and the University of Connecticut, he also managed to pick up an MBA from Howard as well. And for those of you who didn't notice it, this was a small piece of news that might have gotten lost in mid-pandemic. Earlier this year, he was appointed to an endowed chair in surgery at Howard's Hospital, which means he's still working, which means you might go in for a medical procedure, for an operation at Howard, and find that the guy holding the scalpel is actually the president of the university. I figured maybe before that happens, it would be nice to get to know you a little bit. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So you and Howard and so many of us Americans and people in the world right now are in the middle of this crisis, or middle of multiple crises. And it seems to me that you and Howard are sort of at the intersection of so many of these lines. You know, it's a public health crisis, which is the most important thing. But for a university, it's an economic crisis. How are things going to get paid for? It's a tech challenge. How do you give people a quality education if they're remote? And it's a culture challenge of how do you give people the socioeconomic or socio-emotional experience of college when they're not actually sharing campus. And of course, it's all taking place at Howard, at a famously political student body, against a backdrop of this major upheaval we're in. But I figured we would start with the basics, because I know safety is the top priority for you, which is, and we explained to us a little bit about what the school is doing as you look at the fall semester and maybe the semesters ahead.
Yeah, sure. You know, as you rightly pointed out, health and safety is number one. And so what we have been doing is analyzing all of the data and the CDC recommendations that are coming out and having that guide us. Part of health and safety, though, is not only the response to the pandemic, but we also have a student body that includes some students that have housing insecurity and food insecurity away from our campus, and our campus tends to close that gap for them and put them in a safer place with respect to housing and food. And so we have to think about that as well, opening our residence halls if possible and if safe. It has an added benefit to some of those students. And so that's what we're focused on. We have a hybrid model we're planning for now. 80% of our classes are online. We hope to bring primarily our freshmen back, or I should say our freshmen to campus. I think it's important for them to start their education off on the right foot. The journey for college is not just one about educational knowledge and instruction, but it's also one about emotional, and it's a formative time of your life. And so we think for that emotional health, and this is the class also that didn't have a regular graduation and commencement. And so I think there could be deep psychological harm as well to those students. And unfortunately, if we have to go online, we are going to have to try to fill that gap as well and be thoughtful about this generation of students in terms of how we really service them in the best way possible.
Do you have a sense of how many people you expect to come to campus?
Yeah, so we have an unusual circumstance here in which this year, the Department of Justice changed their rules around how you commit to universities and what that meant. You know, May 1st, we talk about as the date, and To avoid collusion, the Department of Justice decided that after you committed to a university, other universities could still offer you scholarships, et cetera. So as a result, we increased our pool just because we expected to lose more students over time. What has happened though is we've had significant what I call stickiness. So we were anticipating an incoming class in the vicinity of 2,100. We had over 2,600 students commit to Howard. Our melt is now down to about 2,400 first-time in college students, but quite a significant number have said that they want to stay home and not come to campus. So we still anticipate having about 2,500 to 3,000 students on campus, which would include freshmen, athletes, and those in fields such as the health sciences.
What's your understanding of how easy it is for students to do this remotely? Someone who comes to Howard is going to have had a lot of success in regular school, and now they've got to do this pivot. What does that involve, and how confident are you in it?
Yeah, I don't think it's easy. I have to be honest. I think it actually could be difficult. One of the things we think about Howard students, I say this at orientation every year. 20% of the education you'll get here will occur in the classroom, but 80% of it occurs outside. It occurs in the hallways of the residence hall. It occurs in the cafeteria. It occurs at different types of sporting events. It occurs at a robust debate under the flagpole about politics and those types of things. And that's why residential aspects of what we do at universities is so important. And that's how people make connections as well, that then go on to become great partnerships. You look at some of the great companies in America, they really started because of college friendships and interactions and ideas that 2 or 3 people got together and supported. And so I think it's critical in terms of that aspect, and it will be difficult. The other aspect is that online instruction is uneven for everyone else. So you have people who are going to be at home and have that difficulty in terms of, do they have broadband? Do they have all the right equipment? And then the other aspect that unfortunately we're not speaking about enough is you have faculty who in certain school districts are not going to have the usual support during the day. And so childcare and daycare is going to be a challenge. And so their ability as well to deliver that education while at the same time providing childcare and daycare could be difficult. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot for us to be thoughtful about and to be flexible around as well, which is one of the things that we don't do well in this environment, and that's practice patience. And I certainly understand that.
Well, has the school had to make investments in technology to like Zoomify the classrooms?
Yeah, we certainly had to. We had to go out and buy a significant number of Zoom licenses, which we were able to do fairly quickly. Half of our faculty was certified for online instruction, so we had to train the rest of them. So we had to invest to do that in a 10-day turnaround. And then since then, we've had online instruction during the summer. And so almost all of our faculty now are there. I teach a class in the spring, actually, and had to do some of that myself. And it's very different when you teach a PhD course on higher education leadership. For example, I teach a course called The Presidency, and I meet with those students every Wednesday, and it's great. I meet them in my conference room. It's usually 10 students or less. And then I had to go to Zoom, and it's a very different feel. It's a very different connection point. And so it is a talent, and it is a skill set that you have to develop. You can't just transfer what you would do in a normal setting to that so seamlessly.
I mean, in the broader context of higher education, and this may be less of an issue for a place like Howard where the shared culture is so important. But do you worry that people are going to get too used to it to say, well, I can do organic chemistry on Zoom. Why do I need to pay to live in a campus?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things with respect to that. I think when you think of, in terms of prioritizing how you bring people, the health and safety, the faculty, there are lots of moving parts. And I think consultation is one, having, board transparency is another, so that people understand kind of what the moving parts are and making sure that we get that. And more constituents you involve, I think the better, because there are things that you wouldn't naturally think about that may be that much more important to that particular constituents group, that you still need to be considering. So student athletes is that's an example where although we don't have fall sports, you still want them to keep a competitive edge and so on. So do you bring them back and give them opportunities to continue practicing their craft and perfecting it? So I think, deep consultation, I would say, is a major part of that aspect as well.
Well, one of the things you hear about, particularly with Howard, right, is this long legacy of students arrive from wherever they're from, whatever education background they've had, and they have this sort of emotional feeling of like, I'm home, I'm at the Mecca, and I am walking in the footsteps of like Thurgood Marshall and Zora Neale Hurston and whoever. And there is this acculturation process where sophomores and juniors and seniors kind of induct you into this legacy. How do you ensure that there's no rupture in that? That the sophomores and juniors and seniors aren't around. If today's freshmen or tomorrow's upperclassmen who don't have the same memory, I know you've had to cancel the homecoming and a lot of the traditional events. Is there anything else you're going to be doing to try to keep that culture unbroken?
Yeah, we've started doing that already. What we have done is we've stood up some virtual activities, some symposia around some of these topics that you're speaking about, especially given the hotbed of political activism that's taking place currently. We've been engaging our students around these issues in a virtual format. And our intent is to continue that, especially in an election year. This campus tends to be very active in terms of making sure people are registered to vote, making sure that we're bringing people to campus to have the robust discussions about what's taking place. We did that in 2016, and our intent is to do it again this year as well. It's not something we want to lose. At the same time, I would also posit that sometimes we romanticize protesting, I think, on this campus in terms of protesting for the sake of protesting. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do a very good job of is to make sure that some of that activity that took place, we recognize that the people who participated in that were really grounded in the knowledge of those issues. And that still has to be the hallmark of the Howard student who protests, that they are absolutely clear about what the issues are, what the moving parts are, and how you manage through those things. And I think that that's a key ingredient to anything that you want people to be doing in terms of as they come into their own around activism and advocacy, that they understand the issues, they're willing to understand the other person's point of view, even if you disagree, and that you have a robust discussion about it. And unfortunately, to some extent, as a country, we've lost our way around that issue. And I think on our campuses, we just can't afford to lose that. Our campuses should be, I hope, the last bastion of robust debate.
Do you feel like that has been under threat at Howard itself?
I think it's been under
threat you had to push back on?
Yeah, I think it has been under threat in higher ed. And definitely, yes, here I've had to push back on that. I want to see and hear a diverse set of voices on campus, because I think that's how you really affirm your truth. And I think for our motto of truth and service, that truth has to be challenged in a robust way. And that's how you really get grounded in what you believe in, and how firm you are. I love HBCUs and what they do as an example, but that's because I've visited many of the campuses, interacted with many of the other institutions, and I have a very different understanding of it. I could be an advocate for HBCUs just on the surface of it, but having come to know many of them and what they've done, I'm an ardent supporter, while others try to ask the question, why do we still need them? And that often is not an appropriate question in my mind's eye.
The statistics on things like percentages of judges, percentages of STEM graduates from HBCUs is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'll give you some of those statistics because I think it is actually earth-shattering, to be quite honest. We represent 3% of higher ed institutions in America, yet still we award 22% of the bachelor's degrees that go to African Americans in this country. If you look at the top 10 schools over the past 2 decades that have sent African Americans to STEM PhDs, Howard is number one. The top 10 schools are all HBCUs. And this is to STEM PhDs all across the country. But what is really amazing about that is not only is Howard number one, but we've sent as many as Stanford, MIT, Harvard, and Yale combined. And that is a staggering statistic. When you look at our endowment is $753 million as of yesterday. And Harvard's based on, and Stanford and MIT and Yale based on the Dow and the stock market performance yesterday is probably $110 billion. So we really, in terms of, I think, what the country needs in terms of diversifying fields, the country is getting an incredible return on investment for very, very low, unfortunately, I would say an underinvestment. And that's something that we have to change.
So I want to turn the clock back a bit. You were 16 years old, and you have sickle cell disease. You show up here in Washington, D.C. in the 80s. What was that like?
It was incredible. And, I showed up here around this time of year. It was August. My mom and I traveled to New York. At that time, we had family in Brooklyn. We stayed there for a week, and then we made the journey down to DC. And I got to tell you, it was exhilarating. The first time I stepped foot on this campus, the energy, the welcoming, it was incredible. And having sickle cell and my mom being a nurse, it was also terrifying for her, as I would, come to understand within a couple of days. The night before she left, she was absolutely emotionally an emotional wreck. She was crying. She offered to me to, just go in the next day and withdraw the money that we paid, and
Right.
I could get back on the plane, and she wouldn't think anything of it. It was a last ditch effort to undo what now, as I look back, seems crazy. I have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. I'm a university president. My kids are healthy. They are absolutely fantastic kids because of the job that my wife has done raising them, to be quite honest, and also the genetic imprint that she has left in them. And I've got to tell you, I am not looking forward to dropping them off in college. So I can't imagine how she did it. So it was an exciting time, but at the same time, it was uncertain. But that's why I think Howard is such a special place, because it took me in and provided me that family. I never felt unwelcome. I tell people all the time, I feel like I'm from DC because I came here so young. I learned to drive on Howard's campus, and I'm just a DC kid with a really strange Southern accent.
Really far south. Where did you live in those first years?
Yeah, so my best friend actually applied for me to come to Howard, turned in the application fee, etc. And I say that because I had no clue what I was doing, so I didn't apply for housing on time. I was part of the largest freshman class, and so I actually lived in Brooklyn. I lived on the corner of 13th and Jackson Northeast, DC, in a house with some other guys. Our landlady lived with us. Totally different time. I caught the H2, H4 bus across town. So the other thing about my experience in terms of going to Howard is I felt I was part of the city. I love meeting people who are originally from DC, and because that was my first experience, I've always felt part of this larger community, and I always felt that Howard, needed to be part of the larger community as well.
You were also a foreign student coming to America, so your, experiences coming from Trinidad were fairly different than the ones your classmates might have had. They were a minority in this country, a minority that's often been kicked around. You came from a very different country with very different demographics. What surprised you when you came to America? What did you learn about it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I grew up in a country where the physicians looked like me. My grandfather was a lawyer. After being a school principal, later on in life, he became a lawyer. My mom was a nurse. My father, who died right before my third birthday, was a police officer. So everybody I saw in any position of authority looked like me. So that was never really an issue. And then I came here, and I think one of the things, and I love the fact that I was at Howard. I think there's no better way to be introduced to America than on Howard's campus as a person of color. I learned a lot about the African American experience. I was amazed at how different everybody was. The kids from California were all into Tupac and the kids from Brooklyn were all into, at that time, LL Cool J and Biggie. And I mean, it was the culture, the fact that it was so different, the fact that it was so vast, and the fact that African Americans, who to me was so much a fabric of the society, were also so marginalized. And learning about that history and about the contemporary experience at the same time was also very enlightening. And for a young, wide-eyed, idealistic 16-year-old who felt that, everything in the world was fear, and if it wasn't, it was made to be fear, it probably was a greatest place for me to get that introduction. And so that's the other thing about a Howard education that I think was great. That, I admit that it wasn't my experience, but I quickly learned that it had to become my experience.
The city, I mean, I am a native Washingtonian too. The city in those days was such a different place, and the campus too. You were an undergraduate when the school was rocked by these protests after the 1988 election.
Yeah.
Lee Atwater, for those of people who don't remember, Lee Atwater, who had been the author of this truly racist advertisement that the elder George Bush ran, he was named to the board, and students moved to shut things down and get him off the board. What was that like for you? You're walking into this different country context.
Yeah. It was again eye-opening. The first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, actually was a political science professor here, and he went to Oxford, and he would come here and say that Howard was the Black Oxford, and he had to come here, to really kind of polish and refine the last part of his journey before taking Trinidad and Tobago away from colonialism and making it an independent country, and then subsequent a republic in '76. And I give that context because I always understood that the political nature of what happened in this campus was important. It was part of the fabric of America. I would be honest with you as well, because I think sometimes people romanticize some of these experiences. I had no clue why people were protesting, why they took over the administration building. I was concerned that class was out and I needed to be in class.
Right.
I had paid that $5,005 tuition and fees, and I was extremely concerned about what was happening. What was good about being in this campus is that, you got an education about why, and I remember people explaining to me about Lee Atwater, about his role in the Republican presidential election, about his role in the ad against Dukakis, and building that argument. Becoming the president now and looking back at that and thinking of, James Cheek, who was the president at that time as a Republican, who, when you look at what he did in terms of raising funds for Howard through the federal appropriation and how he did that through his relationship with the Republican presidents, Reagan, and subsequent George W. Bush, etc. It's a much more complicated story, not probably nuanced, but definitely complicated. And I think as a young person, one of the things that I wish I had done more of at that time was really research the issue and get into it. And that's why I always I'm pushing for students not to not protest, but to understand all the details of the issue, and including my alum. I think sometimes people read things, they don't ask further questions, and unfortunately they walk away not with the full story. And I think a lot of these things are way more complicated than you can imagine.
So looking back at your time as an undergraduate, this was also at a time when this city was rocked by this drug war that had major racial disparities, violence, and then you come back and you're president, and there is an African-American president of the country, and there is the neighborhood around Howard is at the epicenter of gentrification. This is one of the folks online asked a question to this effect. Do you ever feel like, man, I'm old, I don't even recognize the place?
Yeah, it's something that I think touches me deeply, and that's because I trained in general surgery here, and a lot of my rotations took place at DC General Hospital in the middle of the crack epidemic, and seeing people lose their lives, especially young Black Americans who were victims of what was taking place at the time was disheartening. At the same time, though, it was also eye-opening because a lot of those young men primarily were my age, and they were people that, while I may have operated on them the night before, I would then be sitting at their bedside, you know, talking about music and movies and stuff like that. And the only thing that separated us was opportunity, to be quite honest. And to this day, sometimes I would go to a Wizards game and I would see some of them there, and they'd see me with my kids, and I would stop and chat to them, and I would think to myself, wow, I mean, this life is really complicated, and you just never know, and some people probably see me interact with some of them and they're not quite understanding of that. You come back now and you have a gentrified neighborhood around here, and I often beg the question of, you know, um, how much did we contribute as an institution? Did we value the people around here, right? Did we bring them into the university? Riding on that H2, H4 bus with local citizens around here, you hear things about Howard. You hear things that they think rich kids go to Howard, and those are those kids versus our kids. And now you have a totally different dynamic, and all of a sudden, sometimes we catch our own righteousness in that dynamic. And so I think there's a tension there that must exist. I have to admit, I want us to support, the original occupants of this neighborhood. And I think it does take away from Howard in somewhat that the neighborhood has changed in such a way that you have people who, it's not just the color of their skin or their background, but also their lack of understanding of Howard and what it is, and sometimes that worries me, that they don't appreciate why we got here and why we are here, and why we are important to the fabric of the city and the fabric of this neighborhood. And so it's a difficult, I think, needle to thread, and one that I do feel strongly about. And the other thing that I think sometimes my alum fail to realize is that that train left the station 20 years ago, long before my presidency. Mm-hmm. So what sometimes people are asking me to do is to jump on the train track and stop the train. Mm-hmm. And what I would argue is what we need to do is to change the train stations. And then when the train slows down a bit, change the tracks, and then do some of those other things in order to get ahead of this. And part of what we have to do as an institution is to make sure that we invest in some pockets of the neighborhood that are still available to us in a way that's responsible, and that kind of really reconnects Howard to what was originally here, as well as form a new relationship with the gentrified neighborhood as well. But it has to be built on mutual respect.
I imagine there's a tension here too, because your job also involves needing to make the finances of Howard as robust as can be. It seems to me one of the things that is most valuable, that is under your control, is literally real estate. So you were, say, going to build a new hospital. The old hospital, I read, might become mixed use, residential and retail, i.e. you could dispose of it in a profit maximizing way, but would also abet the transformation of this historic Black neighborhood.
Yeah, and you're right, it's a catch-22. When I started, our alumni giving rate was 4.96%. It's now up to 12%. We've had a record fundraising year last academic year. We raised over 100% more than our goal that was set. We've had 5 of the 6 largest gifts given to Howard in the past year, excluding the gift that we announced yesterday. All of this pre-pandemic, by the way, and pre the social unrest in the country. So we clearly have been on a very strong trajectory in a different direction. The juxtaposition is, if we are raising enough funds, then we don't need as much revenue from those sources. We're a private institution that charges half of what the other private institutions in the city charge. And we also bring in students with 46% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. The math just doesn't work unless you have a significant philanthropic thrust. And in most institutions, the base of that is your alum. And so you have to do that. And if you don't have that at your disposal while you're growing that, you have to use what you have. And part of what we've had is real estate. And I know that institutions like GW, I think when Stephen Trachtenberg was there, is an example of, I think very shrewd management and leadership that got the university to a place until, some of the other things you can do. And so, yes, there's a healthy tension. We don't sell anything. We want to be owners. We're doing long-term leases, which is another misconception sometimes. But it's out of necessity. It is a business that we have to run, and I have to be fiscally responsible about doing it.
We had one of the folks at the meeting submitted this question, which is related to what you just said. They write, I am certain that alumni giving is one of the priorities you would like to see us do way better at, but asks, in what other ways can alumni support Baby Bison, especially given the change in environment, which is such a major part of our experience as Howard people?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I've been working on with my development and alumni relations team is to try to expand how we look at giving back. Our motto is truth and service. And a lot of times we talk about giving just in terms of dollars and cents. And the reality is, I would say my alum epitomize the embodiment of service. And we have to come up with more ways of looking at service hours. And what they give in the communities that they go back to. A lot of my alum take jobs that pay less because they want to give back to the community. And that's the hallmark of the Howard graduate. So one of the things that we started working on last year, and hopefully we'll be able to launch fully next year. And given all the social unrest, it was kind of ironic that Juneteenth got so much focus. But our proposal is actually that we started working on last year is to have a day of service, a Howard Day of Service on Juneteenth every year, and to count up the service hours that Howard alum provide in general. And with respect to our Baby Bison in general, we want our alum to continue to be mentors. My mentor, one of my mentors was Dr. LaFall. Another mentor of mine is Vernon Jordan, both Howard alum, both men who, for no reason that I deserve, that I can explain to you, took me under their wing. And for that, I'm forever grateful. They both reached out to me before I reached out to them. And I will never understand why, and they continue to be supportive. And so I think that that's what, Howard alum should do.
So you just got an email one day from a world famous doctor or lawyer.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the message I got was Vernon Jordan wanted to meet me for breakfast. And I said, sure. I wasn't sure why. And I got there, and it was a fascinating conversation, and in the midst of that conversation, he questioned me about what I wanted to do at Howard and said that he had heard about me. At that time, I was serving as the interim president. And I was thinking to myself, here's this man who has advised presidents of the United States, has been in the hallways of corporate America as a board of director member. And he took the time to meet me for breakfast because I had the stewardship of his alma mater. And he came from a place of love, which I also find interesting, that he could have come from a place of antagonism. To your point, he could have said, what are you doing? You're a surgeon with an MBA. We need a massive financial turnaround here. And, you're too young. It was none of that. He was somebody from a totally different generation who had a lot going on, and yet still he had more time for me than you can imagine. And same thing with Dr. LaFall. Dr. LaFall, asked me to come here from University of Connecticut. He knew me as a student. And while I was away training, he would call me ever so often. And one day he asked me to come down and visit. I did. I had a young baby boy at the time and my wife, and we got into his office, and I knew something was different. He had a white tablecloth on his coffee table, pastries and juices out. And he looked at me and said, I'm going to stop operating, and I need you to come back to alma mater. And as I told my wife when we left that room, there's only one answer you give to a man like that.
So by the time you came back, like we said, this was this time of, nationally at least, there was a certain optimism. Obama was in the White House. And now we've had this major political change, and we've also had this kind of traumatic couple of years. And I had heard from one of your team, we sat together at the Washingtonians of the Year banquet a couple of years ago, that applications went way up after the 2016 election. To what do you attribute that?
Yeah, I think...
Besides your tremendous leadership, of course.
No, I think we both know that that wasn't the reason why. I think the country, got a shock, and that's a reality. And I think we, not being overly political about it, I think that's a reality. And our political science majors went from being, I think, fourth or fifth most popular major on this campus to now it's rivaling biology, which has been number one for years. And I think that that's the state the country is in. And you have to remember as well, too, that group of students who were coming in around 2016 really grew up knowing a Black president in the White House who carried himself and conducted himself in a certain manner, right? Was very, very sharp, just really, you know, carried himself in a way with empathy, etc. And then you had a very brash, harsh election cycle in 2016, and then you had and we now have a president who didn't necessarily have the traditional background, doesn't necessarily carry himself with the same traditional airs as our president, regardless of their political, persuasions. And this has been a different era. And just like my kids, I remind everyone, my kids are 16 and 14. The only president they knew looked like them. And so when you go from that, for them, this is not the norm. In an America that still marginalizes African Americans, I have kids that are of a generation that think that what's happening now is the exception to the rule. And so we have to think about that. And Howard, as you bring these students for this generation in, you are seeing them say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. And this place here seems to uphold the values that resonate with me. And I think that that's what we're continuing to see. And the last thing I'd say is the people who come here are very sophisticated now. Parents are very sophisticated about results and what we do. And our graduation rate is up 20%. That's not lost on parents. They quote that back to me all the time. They're aware that if you want to go to medical school and you have to go to undergrad, Howard does it better than anybody else for African Americans. So they are very, very shrewd as well and savvy about picking Howard. So it's not just about coming here, as it were, to find themselves and put themselves in a cocoon. That's not that they recognize that they're going to be challenged academically because we have a very rigorous environment as well.
There may also be, a certain relief in, say, a professor treats you poorly, you don't have to wonder whether it was about your race. There might have been some other reason that was unfair. But
your D is a D here. I'll tell you that. If anything, your D is probably well earned here and elsewhere. And that's real. I think students don't have to spend their time, wondering, is somebody coming at me for the wrong reason? They recognize that most of what's happening here is because we want them to be the best that they can be, and we want to challenge them. And I think that a lot of students here accept that as well, which I think is the amazing thing. But one of the things I think we should not lose is that I think we do a great job at Howard, but I also think we do not, we have to praise more the African American family. What African American families do with the preparation of the students come here is also, I think, discounted, unfortunately. And they do a great job. They send their children here well prepared. And I think for all the rhetoric that occurs in the society that I think sometimes is misleading, the students that I see here, their parents have poured into them in an amazing way. And I think sometimes we discount that, and we discount the value of that, to the point where I met with a congressman once, and one of his questions about my Pell Grant students were how many of them had single mothers. And he wasn't asking so much to be derogatory, but there was some piece of data that he had seen somewhere. And I came back and I looked, and the students, the graduation rate of the kids at Howard who have single mothers listed actually was better than those who came from two-parent families. So the Black woman in America and what she does for the fabric of the society for Black America is unbelievable. And that's another thing that I don't think we tell the story of enough.
We had a question from Dawn who asks, what are the gender discrepancies that are currently existing at Howard? And what can we as alumni do to balance the playing field more going forward?
Yeah, the gender discrepancy is that 2/3 of our undergrads are women, a third obviously are males, and you have the LGBTQ community that's growing as well, in terms of people not necessarily identifying in binary gender. And I think that, as we look at it, the pipeline, you had more African American males apply to medical school in 1978 than in 2015. And we have a crisis in America, and we are heavily dependent on fewer institutions, including Howard, to help that. We have a middle school on our campus. 90-something% of the students from that middle school attend college, and 60% of them actually choose STEM fields. And so it demonstrates that if you invest in kids early, you would really fill out that pipeline. And so we have to continue to support that. The systemic racism that exists in this country, that everybody is paying attention to right now, has been ongoing. And part of the problem is the caravan to justice has not had full support of the American society. Institutions like Howard have been carrying that caravan for a while. And we're in a moment in time where the caravan has been joined by many friends, and we hope that they stay the distance. But even if they don't, Howard is going to be here on that journey.
Well, I wanted to ask another question that somebody had sent in or typed in, which notes this 8-figure gift that you all announced this week. Howard University has been in the media recently, first a scandal in the bursar's office, and then yesterday, philanthropist Mackenzie Scott just donated $40 million. This attendee asks, Dr. Frederick, how will you ensure that the funds will be allocated correctly during COVID-19 times and beyond? What are your top priorities?
Yeah, sure. The fact that we had 2 former employees who were fired under my tenure, because we conducted an audit and found that something was wrong, and then we conducted an investigation and fired some 6 employees actually. 2 of them have now pled guilty. I think actually suggests that we are best prepared to manage finances and to limit any type of fraud that's going to occur. We have a sacred obligation to ensure that those funds are well spent. It's a fantastic gift, a transformative gift for us. And I think the fact that those employees may spend some time in jail and have restitution to give us back our money means that I'm not going to let a dime walk out of here inappropriately. The other thing too is, again, I think, you can't have a complex organization with over 5,000 employees and not expect, everybody to not do the absolute right thing. What you must do is have a culture that you're not going to tolerate it. Yeah. And that's something that we're not going to tolerate. 99.99% of the employees here at Howard did not do that. And during that period of time, we gave out $220 million worth of aid, and these 2 employees basically embezzled $104,000, and they will spend time in jail for it. So the $40 million that we're bringing in, we're going to be excellent stewards. This is an example where I just wish people would put things in context and read it. If you go back and you look, you could Google any story about university and fraud, you will see everywhere from Columbia to Harvard, people are being caught doing things they shouldn't be doing. And in the 7-figure range, and being fired, and that's what we did. I'm not proud of the fact that occurred, but I also want to be clear that I'm very proud of the 99.99% of employees who are here, and I just wish that sometimes we would show them some love and not try to scandalize our institution. We talk about Black Lives Matter, but I sometimes wonder how much we really embrace each other and hug each other, enough, and we need to do more of that.
I wanted to go back to you for a second. I'm a magazine editor, and like this morning I edited a story, and we had a meeting about some possible future stories, and then I had to interview you, and it was like, wow, that's a big change. But you are a university president, and so I imagine, you talk to a trustee in the morning, or some advisory neighborhood commissioner is complaining about noisy students, and then you actually go and perform surgery. That's a heck of a change. Do you have anything like to shift your headspace from one of your roles to the other?
I have to admit, I do like the variety. I would say that. And so, yes, this morning was a good example. This morning I came into work. I went to the hospital because I have a couple of patients in the hospital. I saw them with the residents. That was an opportunity to do a little bit of teaching. I then left there and came up here. I spoke to a venture capitalist firm that we've been trying to, get involved with. I did talk to a trustee right before I got on with you, and I'm doing this now. And yes, it's a wide variety of things. I enjoy that. I think that God has given me an opportunity in life that I appreciate. And I grew up not knowing how long I would live because of my sickle cell. And so one of the things I embraced very early on is that I am obsessed about the journey of life because I don't think there's any destination that will completely fulfill me. And so what I try to do every day is to make a difference. I try to bring some type of light to other people's lives. It starts at home with my own wife and kids, and I try to pour everything possible into making their lives as comfortable as possible. But as I go about my day, that's what I'm trying to do. And I think having a variety of interests and a variety of involvement in our broader society gives me that opportunity. But I'll tell you, the things that I enjoy most are the things that would never make the news and the things that you probably would never ask me about, such as running into that one medical student who came and watched me operate when she was an undergrad and now as a medical student. And those are the things that really bring the joy of seeing that patient that I operated on 5 years ago, come back and is doing well.
So you're saying that if you were my surgeon, I shouldn't worry about you being distracted with university president work.
Yeah, I'm not distracted. I'll tell you, when I get to the operating room, it's probably my sanctuary. I've got to be honest. It's a special place to this day. It's very different from what I do as the president. It's the most thankful job in America, in my opinion, because I operate on patients with GI cancers. The mortality rate from those cancers is very high. Oftentimes, I'm coming out and giving bad news to families, and they get up and hug you. And the courage that cancer patients have and their families and seeing those families support each other, that's witnessing love every day. And then I come here and I try to administer and do what's right and in the best interest of this historic institution. And everybody from alums to the faculty complain and protest, and it's the most thankless job. But at the same time, this place is so special that I have to pour every sinew of energy into it. So I think in the operating room, that's my sanctuary. Nobody tells me what to do there. And then when I come here, everybody gets to tell me what to do, and I try to listen.
Well, listen, thank you very much. You've given us a lot of time. I have a couple of questions from folks online, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
One of the attendees asks, and this is the farthest thing I can think of from performing cancer surgery, what is the plan for the Division of Fine Arts to again become the College of Fine Arts?
Yeah, the Board of Trustees has already approved that. I took that to the Board of Trustees, and basically, I felt it was necessary for us to do that. If you turn on your television set every night of the week, there's a Howard alum, either in front or behind the camera, whether it's Susan Kelechi Watson, who I was on a Zoom call with yesterday, from This Is Us, to Anthony Anderson in Blackish, etc. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really make sure that we stand that up well. It was closed back in 98, 99, and became a division. And so the Board of Trustees has already approved that. We're going to be out searching for a dean this fall. And then once we bring the dean in, the goal is to stand it up completely next year. And so by fall of 2021, we'll have the college back fully.
You just got a grant from HBO.
Yeah, we did. On Monday, we announced that $1 million. It's tough to announce $1 million gift on Monday and then a $40 million gift on Tuesday. People sometimes forget about that as well. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Suzanne Kelechi Watson, and Camilla Forbes, all who were here when the College of Fine Arts became a division of fine arts, have been very, very supportive of the university. And so they have really pushed to go out and get the university and get the support. So I've appreciated, what they have done. And so in negotiating to put his novel on there as a bit of a movie, he negotiated, I should say they all negotiated that HBO make a gift to Howard, and that's what you want your alum to do, always thinking of you.
And finally, I think this seems like a good question to end on. For Dr. Frederick, what would you say to students who are considering attending Howard and have the grades to do so? but are afraid of leaving home when the world is under siege. Anything from your own experience leaving home that you can draw upon?
Yeah, the world is under siege, but the soldiers that are going to release us from this war are those young people who are going to come to our university. And so it takes a lot of courage in the middle of a pandemic to kind of really, I guess, go out to a different shore, especially with things not just being unknown, but also things being so dangerous. But I think we're going to have a golden generation. I think these young people today who are going to come to Howard University are going to come at the very best time because it's a time of crisis. And out of that time of crisis, I think what you're going to get is a generation that is going to rise. They would have seen some of the worst of us. And I think that actually will bring out the best in their angels. And so I think that they can come now, their wings will grow, and they'll have an opportunity to hang their wings up in their closets of their jobs, but they will take their wings everywhere they go with them. And those wings will be well sharpened here at Howard University to put them in flight.
Well, thank you very much for spending an hour with me today. I know you're busy, and I hope we will continue to keep up in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed, seeing you at the dinner, and I appreciate what you do. And I think it was very, very humbling to have you ask me to do this. Appreciate you.
Thank you.